Commander Zarathus pressed her clawed fingers against the observation deck's transparent aluminum, watching the human vessel dock with their medical station. Her twin hearts beat in an irregular pattern, a condition that had plagued her species for generations. The Keth Mori were warriors, conquerors of 17 star systems, but they carried a fatal flaw in their biology. Their dual cardiovascular system, while providing incredible strength and endurance, was prone to a degenerative condition called heart echo syndrome. When one heart began to fail, it would cause the other to mirror its deterioration, leading to inevitable death. The irony wasn't lost on her that the most feared military commander in 3 sectors was slowly dying from her own biology. She had led the Keth Mori fleet through countless victories, her tactical brilliance unmatched across known space. Yet here she stood, watching a primitive human medical team arrive as her last hope for survival. Dr. Marcus Chen stepped off the transport ship, his modest medical bag slung over his shoulder. He looked unremarkable compared to the towering Keth Mori warriors surrounding him. Where they stood 7 feet tall with scaled skin and razor-sharp claws, he was average height with soft human features and gentle brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. The station's artificial gravity felt different from Earth's, but he adjusted quickly, a skill he'd developed during his years working in frontier colonies. Dr. Chen, Ambassador Veltar approached with measured steps. The Keth Mori diplomat's voice carried the characteristic growl of his species. Commander Zarathus awaits you in the medical bay. I must warn you, she is not pleased about requiring assistance from your kind. Marcus nodded calmly. He had faced skepticism before. Humans were still newcomers to the galactic community, barely a century since first contact. Most alien species viewed them as technologically inferior, emotionally unstable, and physically weak. What they didn't understand was that humanity's greatest strength lay not in their technology or physical prowess, but in their stubborn refusal to accept defeat when it came to preserving life. The medical bay was a marvel of Keth Mori engineering, all sharp angles and metallic surfaces designed for their scaled physiology. Commander Zarathus sat on the examination table, her massive frame making the furniture creak. Her scales, normally a vibrant emerald, had dulled to a sickly gray-green. The neural crown that marked her rank flickered weakly, its bioluminescent patterns irregular. So the humans send a child to heal what our greatest medical minds cannot, she said, her voice carrying both pain and disdain. Tell me, little mammal, how do you propose to fix what is unfixable? Marcus set down his bag and pulled out a simple stethoscope, an instrument that would have seemed primitive to any alien observer. Commander, may I listen to your hearts? Zarathus laughed, a sound like grinding metal. Listen, with that ancient device? Our bioscanners can detect irregularities down to the molecular level. Bioscanners detect data, Marcus replied, approaching without fear. This listens to the story your hearts are telling. He held up the stethoscope. May I? Something in his tone made her pause. There was no condescension, no false bravado. Just genuine curiosity and an odd sort of confidence. Against her better judgment, she nodded. Marcus placed the stethoscope against her chest, moving it carefully to different positions. Her scales were warm beneath the instrument, and he could feel the irregular rhythm that was killing her. But more than that, he sensed something the Keth Mori medical team had missed. After several minutes, he stepped back. Your hearts aren't failing, he said quietly. They're grieving. The room fell silent. Zarathus stared at him with predatory yellow eyes. Explain yourself, human. Marcus pulled up a chair, deliberately, positioning himself at her eye level, rather than looking up at her intimidating height. Heart echo syndrome isn't a disease, it's a trauma response. Your species developed dual hearts as an evolutionary advantage, but that same evolution made them emotionally linked. When you experience profound loss or emotional trauma, one heart begins to mourn. The other heart, sensing its partner's distress, begins to mirror that grief. Ridiculous, Zarathus snarled, but her voice lacked conviction. Hearts are organs. They pump blood. They don't feel emotions, don't they? Marcus asked gently. Tell me about the Battle of Nexus 7th. The color drained from her scales entirely. Nexus 7th was where she had lost her entire squadron, including her younger brother Keithadal, in an ambush that she blamed herself for. The official reports called it a strategic victory, but she knew the truth. Her arrogance had led them into a trap. How do you know about that? She whispered. Because grief has a sound, Marcus explained. Your left heart beats with the weight of guilt, while your right heart struggles to maintain hope. They're not synchronized anymore because you're fighting an internal war between what you've lost and what you're trying to protect. Dr. Skelmoth, the station's chief physician, stepped forward. This is absurd. Heart echo syndrome is well documented. There is no cure. Marcus turned to face the alien doctor. You're right that there's no cure, because you've been treating symptoms instead of the cause. You've been trying to fix hearts that aren't broken mechanically. They're broken emotionally. He turned back to Zarathes. Commander, your medical scans show perfect heart function from a biological standpoint. The echo pattern started exactly 3 months after Nexus 7th. Your hearts aren't dying from disease. They're dying from the weight of carrying pain you've never allowed yourself to process. Zarathes stood abruptly, towering over him. You think you understand war, human? You think you understand loss? Marcus met her gaze steadily. I understand that losing people you love feels like dying yourself. I understand that sometimes we'd rather let our bodies fail than face the pain of healing. And I understand that healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about learning to carry the weight differently. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Zarathes spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Even if you're correct, which I'm not saying you are, how would one go about healing hearts that mourn? Marcus smiled for the first time since arriving. The same way humans have always healed grief, Commander. One conversation at a time, one memory at a time, one moment of forgiveness at a time. He paused, studying her face. But first, you have to want to heal. Do you want to live, Commander? Zarathes? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time in months her twin hearts beat in perfect synchronization for 3 whole seconds before falling back into their broken rhythm. She began, then stopped. The admission was harder than any battle she'd ever fought. I don't know if I deserve to. The medical bay had been cleared of all personnel except Marcus and Zarathes. At her request, the Kethmori commander had dismissed even her most trusted advisors. The vulnerability of the moment was almost unbearable for a warrior who had built her reputation on unshakable strength. Marcus had pulled his chair closer, creating an intimate space that felt both foreign and oddly comforting to the massive alien. He had spent the last hour simply listening as she recounted the events of Nexus 7, her voice growing stronger with each detail shared. Keithadal was young, barely past his first molting, she continued, her claws unconsciously tracing patterns on the examination table's surface. He begged me to let him join the advanced squadron, said he wanted to prove himself worthy of the family name. Her voice cracked slightly. I should have said no. I should have kept him with the main fleet. Marcus nodded, making no attempt to interrupt or offer quick solutions. He had learned early in his medical career that healing often required simply bearing witness to pain. He was so proud when I agreed, Zarathes went on. His scales practically glowed with excitement. The last thing he said to me was that he would make me proud. She paused, her breathing becoming labored. Instead, I led him and 47 others into a trap. Tell me about the trap, Marcus said gently. Zarathes closed her eyes, and Marcus could see her twin hearts beating visibly through her scales. The left one struggling against an irregular rhythm. Intelligence suggested a small rebel force had taken shelter in the asteroid field. Standard procedure would have been to send scouts first, but I was eager to end the campaign. I thought overwhelming force would prevent casualties. What actually happened? The rebels had been feeding us false intelligence for weeks. They'd converted the entire asteroid field into a minefield, with hidden weapon platforms in every shadow. The moment we entered the field, they activated everything at once. Her voice became hollow. It was a slaughter. I watched my brother's ship disintegrate on the tactical display. I couldn't even recover his body. Marcus leaned forward slightly. What did you do then? I ordered a full retreat and called for orbital bombardment. We turned the entire asteroid field into dust. Her eyes opened, meeting his. I told myself it was justice, but it was really just rage. The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. Marcus had noticed something crucial in her account, but he waited for her to continue. The worst part, she whispered, is that we found evidence afterward. The rebels were planning to surrender. They'd been using the trap as a desperate negotiation tactic. If I had been patient, if I had followed protocol, Kethdal and the others would still be alive. And the rebels would have lived too, Marcus observed quietly. Zarathus nodded miserably. 47 of my people and nearly 200 rebels. All dead because I was too proud to wait, too eager for glory. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, then asked, When did your heart start showing symptoms? 3 months and 5 days after the funeral ceremony. I woke up one morning and felt wrong, like something inside me was breaking. She touched her chest unconsciously. The medical team said it was genetic, that there was nothing to be done. But you know better now, don't you? She looked at him with surprise. How do you mean? Your left heart, the one showing the most distress, sits directly over the spot where Kethmori warriors wear their family honor marks. It's not a coincidence. Marcus stood and moved to the medical scanner display. May I show you something? Zarathus nodded, and Marcus called up her heart rhythm patterns from the past several months. Look at this. Every time someone mentions Nexus 7 or refers to you as a war hero, your left heart's rhythm becomes more erratic. But when you talk about Kethdal, when you speak his name with love instead of guilt, both hearts stabilize. The pattern on the display was undeniable. Zarathus stared at the data with growing understanding. You're saying my body is responding to my emotions? I'm saying your body is trying to protect your mind from pain it can't process alone. The Kethmori evolved dual hearts for survival advantages, but that same evolution made you more emotionally resilient than most species. Your hearts are designed to support each other through trauma, but when trauma becomes too great for one heart to bear, and you refuse to seek emotional support from others, the system breaks down. Marcus returned to his chair. You've been trying to carry the weight of 47 deaths plus the destruction of the rebel colony entirely alone. Your left heart is literally bearing the weight of guilt for hundreds of lives, while your right heart struggles to maintain hope for the future. They're pulling in opposite directions. So what do I do? The question came out more desperate than she intended. First, you forgive yourself for being imperfect. Marcus's voice was firm but kind. You made a tactical error based on incomplete information and a desire to protect your people. That's not evil, Commander. That's human. I'm not human, she protested. No, but you're feeling something very human right now. Guilt, shame, the crushing weight of responsibility for outcomes you couldn't have fully controlled. He paused. The difference is humans have learned that these feelings, while valid, can also be survived. Zarathus was quiet for several minutes, her claws working nervous patterns on the table's surface. Finally, she spoke. In Kethmori culture, commanders who lose soldiers are expected to carry that burden until death. It's considered honorable. And how's that working out for your species' leadership longevity? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? How many Kethmori commanders live to see retirement? How many die of heart echo syndrome before age 50? Zarathus considered this. Most die in battle, but those who don't. She trailed off, understanding dawning in her eyes. Most develop heart problems within a few years of major losses. Your culture has created a system where good leaders who care about their people are systematically eliminated by their own biology. Meanwhile, sociopathic commanders who don't form emotional bonds with their troops live long, healthy lives. Marcus let that sink in. Is that really honoring the sacrifice of those who died? No, she said quietly. It's not. Kethdal died because he believed in you. He trusted your judgment and your ability to bring him home safely. When that trust was betrayed by circumstances beyond your control, you had two choices. Learn from the experience and become a better leader, or destroy yourself with guilt. Which choice honors his memory? For the first time since Nexus 7th, Zarathus felt something other than crushing guilt. A tiny spark of something that might eventually become hope. Her heart synchronized for nearly 10 seconds before falling back into their broken pattern. The healing won't be quick, Marcus warned, and it won't be easy. But it is possible. Where do we start? she asked. Over the following days, Marcus introduced Zarathus to concepts that had no direct translation in Kethmori language. The closest their military culture came to psychological healing was the ritual burning of shame, where warriors would literally scar themselves to mark their failures. It was meant to serve as a reminder and motivation, but Marcus quickly realized it was actually a form of self-punishment that prevented true healing. "Today we're going to try something different," Marcus announced as he entered the medical bay carrying what appeared to be art supplies. Zarathus eyed the material suspiciously. "I am a military commander, not a youngling in education pod," she growled, though her tone lacked real irritation. Over the past 3 days, her hostility toward the human had gradually transformed into cautious curiosity. "Humor me," Marcus said, setting up a portable easel. "This is called art therapy. It's based on the human understanding that sometimes trauma gets locked in parts of the mind that don't respond to words alone." He handed her a brush and gestured to the blank canvas. "I want you to paint what Nexus 7 feels like, not what it looked like." Zarathus held the brush awkwardly in her clawed fingers. "This is ridiculous. I am a warrior, not an artist." "There's no wrong way to do this," Marcus assured her. "Close your eyes and let your hearts guide your hands." For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, almost without conscious thought, Zarathus began to paint. Dark swirls emerged on the canvas, deep purples and blacks that seemed to swallow light. Gradually, she added harsh red slashes and small points of emerald green that looked fragile and isolated. As she painted, Marcus noticed her breathing change. Her left heart, which had been erratic all morning, began to find a steadier rhythm. The act of externalizing her internal pain seemed to be giving her cardiovascular system permission to relax. "Tell me about the colors," he said softly. "The black is the void where my brother should be," she said without stopping her brushwork. "The purple is the weight of all those deaths pressing down on me. The red—" She paused, adding another violent slash across the canvas. "The red is my anger at myself. And the green spots? Those are—" She hesitated, then added more small green points. "Those are moments when I remember why I became a commander in the first place. To protect people, to be worthy of their trust." Marcus watched as she continued painting, noting how the green points gradually grew larger and more connected. Without realizing it, she was creating a visual representation of hope breaking through despair. "In human culture," Marcus said, "we have a saying, 'The wound is the place where the light enters you.' It means that our deepest pain often becomes the source of our greatest wisdom and compassion." Zarathus paused her painting. "How can pain be a source of light?" "Because it teaches us things that can't be learned any other way." "Before Nexus 7, had you ever lost soldiers under your command? Small losses, individual casualties, nothing like that?" "So you commanded from a position of theoretical knowledge. You understood the risks intellectually, but you'd never felt the true weight of responsibility for other people's lives." She considered this, absently adding more green to her painting. "No, I thought I understood, but I was naive. And now? Now I know that every decision I make carries the weight of all the lives under my command. Every tactical choice, every order, every moment of hesitation or rashness could mean the difference between someone's child coming home or not." Marcus nodded. "That knowledge, terrible as it is, makes you a better commander. Not because you're paralyzed by fear, but because you truly understand what you're asking of people when you lead them into danger." "But how do I carry that knowledge without it destroying me?" "By remembering that the goal isn't to never lose anyone again. The goal is to make their potential sacrifice meaningful, to be worthy of the trust they place in you." Marcus gestured to her painting. "Look at what you've created." Zarathus stepped back and really looked at her artwork for the first time. The dark swirls were still there, but they no longer dominated the canvas. The green points had grown and connected, forming a network of light that pushed back against the darkness without trying to eliminate it entirely. "It's not what I expected," she admitted. "Healing rarely is. The human approach isn't about erasing trauma or pretending it didn't happen. It's about integrating the experience into a larger understanding of who you are and what you're capable of." That afternoon, Marcus introduced her to another human concept: the memorial. In Kethmori culture, the dead were honored through ritual scarring and ceremonial burning of their personal effects. The living were expected to carry the weight of their memory internally and silently. "I want you to write letters," Marcus said, handing her a datapad, one to Kethadal and one to each of the other 46 who died under your command. Right to the dead? Zarathus looked at him as if he'd suggested something blasphemous. Not to the dead. To your relationship with them. To the parts of them that live on in your memory. Tell them what you wish you could have said. Tell them what you learned from knowing them. Tell them how you plan to honor their sacrifice going forward. The exercise proved more difficult than painting. Words felt clumsy and inadequate. But as Zarathus began to write, something unexpected happened. Instead of focusing on their deaths, she found herself remembering their lives. Kethadal's infectious laugh when he'd succeeded at a particularly difficult training exercise. Lieutenant Mordak's habit of making sure the younger soldiers had eaten before he took his own meal. Sergeant Velnith's collection of pressed flowers from every planet they'd visited. As she wrote, her heart rhythms gradually synchronized. Not perfectly, and not permanently, but for longer periods than they had since Nexus 7th. This feels wrong, she confessed to Marcus. Kethmori warriors are supposed to honor the dead through silent suffering. Talking about them feels disrespectful. To whom? Marcus asked. If Kethadal could hear you right now, would he want you to suffer in silence forever? Or would he want you to learn from his death and become a better leader for the soldiers who are still alive? The question hit her like a physical blow. She knew the answer immediately, because she knew her brother. Kethadal had always been more concerned with protecting others than with his own glory or honor. He would be furious with me for wasting months wallowing in guilt instead of using his death as motivation to save other lives, she said quietly. Then what are you going to do about it? For the first time in months, Zarathus smiled. It was a small, sad smile, but it was genuine. I'm going to finish these letters, and then I'm going to figure out how to be the commander they deserve to follow. That night, alone in her quarters, Zarathus completed the last of the 47 letters. As she wrote the final words to Kethadal, both of her hearts beat in perfect synchronization for a full minute. The healing was far from complete, but for the first time since Nexus 7, she felt something she had thought was lost forever: hope. Outside her window, the human medical ship glowed softly in the station's artificial night. Tomorrow she would begin the hard work of rebuilding not just her cardiovascular health, but her understanding of what it meant to be a leader worth following. A week into the treatment, Marcus introduced Zarathus to the most challenging aspect of human healing philosophy: forgiveness. Not just forgiving herself, which was difficult enough, but learning to forgive the rebels who had set the trap that killed her brother and squadron. Absolutely not, Zarathus snarled when Marcus first suggested the concept. Her scales had darkened to almost black, a sign of deep agitation. Those terrorists murdered my people. They deserve nothing but contempt. Marcus remained calm in the face of her fury. I'm not asking you to excuse what they did or to forget your people died. I'm asking you to consider that carrying hatred for the dead rebels might be part of what's keeping your hearts out of sync. Hatred gives me strength, she insisted. It reminds me why we fight. Does it? Or does it keep you trapped in that moment when everything went wrong? Marcus pulled up her heart monitoring data from the past week. Look at this. Every time you mention the rebels, your left heart goes into severe arrhythmia. Your right heart tries to compensate, but it can't maintain the load. You're literally poisoning yourself with rage. Zarathus studied the data, her medical training warring with her emotional need for vengeance. The correlation was undeniable, but accepting it felt like betraying everyone who had died. You humans are weak, she said finally. You forgive because you lack the strength for proper justice. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried an unexpected edge. Commander, how many wars is your species currently fighting? 17 active conflicts across 12 systems, she answered automatically. And how many of those started because someone couldn't forgive an old grievance? Zarathus paused, understanding where he was leading. Most of them, she admitted reluctantly. The Kethmori have been at war for over 3 centuries. Your military might is legendary across the galaxy, but you've never achieved lasting peace anywhere. Meanwhile, humans went from global warfare to relative planetary harmony in less than 200 years. Which approach is actually stronger? The question stung because it contained uncomfortable truth. The Kethmori were consummate warriors, but they had never learned to build lasting peace. Every victory simply led to new conflicts as old grievances festered and spawned fresh violence. Forgiveness isn't about weakness, Marcus continued. It's about refusing to let your enemies control your future. Every day you spend hating those dead rebels is a day they continue to have power over you. That afternoon, Marcus introduced her to meditation techniques developed by human soldiers dealing with combat trauma. The practice felt alien to a species that valued constant vigilance and action, but Zarathus found herself surprisingly receptive to the concept of intentional stillness. Focus on your breathing. Marcus guided her. Don't try to control your hearts directly. Just breathe and let them find their own rhythm. As she sat in the medical bay with her eyes closed, Zarathus became aware of the constant tension she carried throughout her body. Her shoulders were rigid, her claws were partially extended even in relaxation, and her jaw was clenched tight enough to crack metal. She had been living in a state of perpetual combat readiness for months. Now I want you to imagine the rebels who set the trap, Marcus said softly, not as enemies but as people who were also afraid, also fighting for something they believed in. I can't, she said through gritted teeth. They were terrorists. They were parents, siblings, children. They had names and hopes and people they loved, just like Kethdal did. The comparison hit her like a plasma blast. For a moment, her carefully maintained hatred wavered as she was forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that her enemies had been people, not monsters. The intelligence reports mentioned families among the rebel survivors, Marcus continued. Children who lost parents in your orbital bombardment. Spouses who became widows. Siblings who will never see each other again. Zarathus's breathing became ragged. Stop, please. I'm not trying to hurt you, Commander. I'm trying to help you see that the cycle of violence doesn't end with victory. It ends with understanding. Over the next hour, Marcus guided her through a mental exercise that forced her to confront the full humanity of her enemies. It was excruciating work that left her emotionally drained, but something remarkable happened. For the first time since Nexus 7, both of her hearts beat in complete synchronization for over 5 minutes. How do you feel? Marcus asked when the session ended. Empty, she replied honestly, but also lighter? I don't understand it. Hatred is heavy, Marcus explained. It takes enormous energy to maintain anger over time. When you let it go, even temporarily, your entire system can finally rest. That evening, Zarathus requested access to the classified files from Nexus 7. Marcus had suggested she might find healing in understanding her enemy's motivations, but she wasn't prepared for what she discovered. The rebel leader, a woman named Silandra, had lost her entire family in a previous Kethmori raid. Her husband and 3 children had been civilians caught in the crossfire during the initial invasion of their system. The trap at Nexus 7 hadn't been motivated by ideology or territorial ambition. It had been an act of desperate revenge by someone consumed by grief. Reading Silandra's personal logs, which had been recovered from the destroyed base, Zarathus found herself looking into a mirror. The rebel leader's words could have been her own. Rage at the unfairness of loss, desperate need for someone to pay for the deaths of innocents, willingness to sacrifice everything for the chance at revenge. She was me, Zarathus whispered when Marcus arrived for their next session. If our positions had been reversed, I would have done exactly what she did. Marcus nodded. That's the hardest part of healing. Recognizing that our enemies are often people who've been broken by the same kind of pain we carry. But that doesn't make what she did right. No, it doesn't. But it makes it understandable, and understanding is the first step toward forgiveness. For the next 3 days, Zarathus struggled with this new perspective. Her military training screamed that showing empathy for enemies was dangerous weakness. But her healing heart seemed to respond positively every time she managed to view the conflict through a lens of shared humanity, rather than absolute good versus evil. The breakthrough came during a particularly intense meditation session. As she sat quietly, focusing on her breathing and the gradual synchronization of her hearts, Zarathus found herself mentally speaking to Silandra. I understand why you did it, she said to the memory of her enemy. I understand the pain that drove you to set that trap. I can't say I forgive you yet, but I can say that I understand. Both hearts synchronized perfectly for 15 minutes straight. Understanding isn't the same as forgiveness, she told Marcus afterward, but it's a start. Understanding is often all we can manage at first, Marcus agreed. But it's enough to begin healing. That night, Zarathus wrote one more letter. This one was to Silandra, the enemy who had killed her brother and destroyed her life. It was only 3 lines long. I understand your pain. I'm sorry for your loss. I hope we can both find peace. She never sent the letter, but writing it was enough. The next morning, her medical scanners showed the strongest heart synchronization patterns since before Nexus 7. 2 weeks into treatment, an urgent message arrived that threatened to unravel all of Zarathus's progress. The Keithamori High Command had received intelligence about a possible rebel stronghold in the Varric system, and they were requesting her immediate return to active duty. Her replacement commander had suffered casualties in a recent engagement, and military leadership believed only Zarathus had the tactical expertise to handle the situation. "You're not ready," Marcus said bluntly when she showed him the orders. "Your hearts are synchronizing more frequently, but you haven't developed the emotional tools to handle combat stress yet. If you return to active duty now, all the progress we've made could be lost." Zarathus stood at the observation deck, watching the military transport that had arrived to collect her. Part of her wanted to board that ship immediately, to lose herself in the familiar rhythms of warfare and command. But a larger part recognized the truth in Marcus's warning. "They need me," she said quietly. "My people are dying while I sit here talking about feelings." "Your people need you healthy," Marcus countered. "They need a commander who won't make decisions based on unresolved trauma. They need someone who's learned from Nexus 7, not someone who's still running from it." Ambassador Veltar approached them with obvious reluctance. "Commander, I've been ordered to inform you that refusal to report for duty will be considered dereliction. High Command is impatient with your extended medical leave." Zarathus felt her left heart skip several beats while her right heart tried to compensate with rapid, irregular pulses. The familiar stress response was happening again, just when she thought she was making progress. "Breathe," Marcus said quietly. "Use the techniques we've practiced." She closed her eyes and focused on the meditation exercises he'd taught her. Gradually, her heart rhythms began to stabilize, though they remained slightly off sync. "I have a proposal," she said finally. "I'll return to duty, but Dr. Chen comes with me as a medical advisor." Veltar looked skeptical. "The High Command is unlikely to approve a human aboard a Keithamori warship." "Then they can find another commander for the Varric's mission," Zarathus replied with surprising calm. "Because I won't return to active duty without proper medical support." The standoff lasted 2 days. During that time, Marcus worked intensively with Zarathus to develop coping strategies she could use during combat operations. They practiced breathing techniques that could be done even while wearing battle armor, visualization exercises for maintaining emotional balance during tactical planning, and rapid assessment methods for recognizing when her trauma responses were affecting her judgment. "The key is self-awareness," Marcus explained. "You can't prevent emotional reactions to stress, but you can learn to recognize them and compensate accordingly." He showed her how to use her medical scanner to monitor her heart rhythms during decision-making. When her hearts went out of sync, it was a warning sign that her judgment might be compromised by emotional factors rather than tactical reality. "This feels like weakness," Zarathus confessed during one particularly intense training session. "Keithamori commanders are supposed to trust their instincts completely. Your instincts kept you alive and successful for years before Nexus 7, Marcus pointed out. "The problem isn't your instincts. The problem is that trauma has temporarily scrambled your ability to distinguish between real threats and echoes of past pain." Finally, High Command agreed to the arrangement. The official justification was that Dr. Chen's expertise in heart echo syndrome might prove valuable for other affected officers. Privately, everyone understood that Zarathus was too important to lose. Regardless of the unconventional nature of her treatment requirements, the journey to the Varric system aboard the heavy cruiser, Sword of Retribution, proved to be an unexpected test of everything Zarathus had learned. Being back in a military environment triggered numerous emotional flashbacks to Nexus 7, but she now had tools to manage them. During the first tactical briefing, when intelligence officers described the rebel stronghold, her left heart immediately began racing. But instead of pushing through the reaction, she paused and used Marcus's breathing technique. After 30 seconds of focused breathing, her heart synchronized, and she was able to approach the tactical problem with clear judgment. "The situation bears some similarities to Nexus 7, she announced to her staff, surprising everyone by directly addressing the elephant in the room. "I want triple verification of all intelligence reports, multiple escape route analyses, and contingency plans for every scenario we can imagine." Her officers exchanged glances. The old Zarathus would have charged ahead with confidence, trusting her tactical brilliance to overcome any obstacles. This new approach seemed almost timid by comparison. Marcus, monitoring the session from the medical bay, watched her heart rhythms remain stable even as she discussed potentially traumatic scenarios. The real test would come when they reached the combat zone. 3 days into the journey, Zarathus found herself standing in the ship's memorial hall, a sacred space where the names of all fallen Kethmori warriors were inscribed in crystalline panels. She had avoided this place for months, unable to face the grief it represented, but now she approached her brother's name with something approaching peace. "I learned something, Kethdal," she said quietly, tracing his name with one claw. "I learned that honoring your sacrifice doesn't mean destroying myself with guilt. It means becoming worthy of the trust you placed in me." Her hearts beat in perfect synchronization as she spoke. Marcus found her there an hour later, still standing before the memorial wall. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Sad," she replied honestly, "but also grateful. Grateful that I knew him. Grateful for the time we had. Grateful that his death taught me something important about the value of life." "That's healthy grief," Marcus observed. "It hurts, but it also honors what you've lost without destroying what you still have." As they neared the Varick system, intelligence reports began coming in that painted a complex picture. The rebel stronghold was indeed real, but it appeared to be sheltering not just combatants, but also civilian refugees displaced by the ongoing conflict. The old Zarathus might have seen this as a tactical problem to be solved through overwhelming force. But the new Zarathus, informed by her understanding of how grief and desperation could drive good people to violence, recognized it as an opportunity for a different kind of victory. "I want to establish communications with the rebel leadership," she announced during the final pre-mission briefing. "Before we begin any military action, I want to understand their position and explore alternatives to bloodshed." The suggestion was met with stunned silence. Kethmori commanders didn't negotiate with rebels. They crushed them. "Commander," her tactical officer ventured carefully, "such an approach is highly irregular." "So is surviving heart echo syndrome," Zarathus replied calmly. "I'm discovering that irregular approaches sometimes yield superior results." As the Sword of Retribution dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Varick system, Zarathus felt her hearts maintain perfect synchronization. For the first time since Nexus 7, she was approaching a combat situation not with rage or fear, but with wisdom earned through suffering and tempered by understanding. The real test of her healing was about to begin. The Varick system presented exactly the kind of complex tactical situation that would have triggered Zarathus's trauma responses just weeks earlier. The rebel stronghold was embedded within an asteroid mining station that housed over 3,000 civilian workers and their families. Intelligence suggested the rebels were using the civilians as human shields, making a traditional military assault impossible without massive collateral damage. In the past, we would have issued an evacuation ultimatum and then proceeded with orbital bombardment, Admiral Krovak stated during the command briefing via subspace communication. However, given the civilian population, High Command is open to alternative approaches. Zarathus recognized the subtext. High Command was essentially giving her permission to try something unconventional, while maintaining plausible deniability if it failed. She felt her left heart skip a beat as the weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders. But her breathing exercises kept the rhythm stable. "I propose direct negotiation," she announced, causing visible shock among her bridge crew. "I want to speak with the rebel leadership face to face." "Commander," her first officer, Captain Morthek, protested. "Such an action would be unprecedented and extremely dangerous." "So was the trap at Nexus 7, Zarathus replied calmly. "Sometimes unprecedented situations require unprecedented responses." Marcus, monitoring from the medical bay, watched her heart rhythms remain remarkably stable despite the stress of the situation. More importantly, he could see that she was actively using the coping strategies they'd developed rather than simply pushing through emotional responses. The initial communication with the rebel leadership took 6 hours to arrange. The rebels were suspicious of any Kethmori overture, having expected immediate bombardment. When Zarathus finally appeared on their view screen, their leader, a grizzled Vakari named Trendar, seemed genuinely surprised. The butcher of Nexus 7 wants to talk? Trendar's voice carried decades of accumulated bitterness. What trick is this? No trick, Zarathus replied. I want to understand your position and explore whether there's a way to resolve the situation without more bloodshed. Bloodshed? Trendar laughed harshly. Your people have been bleeding us dry for 3 years. You've displaced entire populations, destroyed our trade routes, and turned our children into refugees. Now you speak of avoiding bloodshed? Zarathus felt her right heart accelerate slightly, but she maintained her composure. You're right. The Kethmori have caused tremendous suffering in this region. I can't undo that damage, but I can choose how we move forward from here. The admission shocked both her own crew and the rebel leadership. Kethmori commanders never acknowledged fault or expressed regret for military actions. I've learned something recently, Zarathus continued. I've learned that every act of violence creates more pain that eventually seeks its own outlet. The cycle only ends when someone chooses understanding over revenge. Over the next several hours, a complex picture emerged. The rebels weren't ideological terrorists, but desperate refugees who had been pushed beyond their breaking point. The asteroid mining station had become a sanctuary for displaced families from 3 different star systems. The rebel stronghold was actually a community of people trying to survive while the war raged around them. However, the situation was complicated by the presence of genuine military insurgents who were using the civilian population as cover for their operations. These hardline fighters, led by a Kethmori deserter named Galactic, had no interest in peaceful resolution and were prepared to fight to the death. Galactic lost his family in one of your raids 2 years ago, Trendar explained during a private communication channel. He's become unstable. Half my people follow him out of fear, not loyalty. Zarathus recognized the situation immediately. Galactic was trapped in the same cycle of grief and rage that had nearly destroyed her. The difference was that he had no one to help him find a path toward healing. I want to speak with him, she announced. That would be suicide, Marcus warned privately. He's essentially a walking embodiment of your own trauma. The psychological triggers could be overwhelming. Maybe, Zarathus agreed, but someone needs to break the cycle, and I'm the only one here who might understand what he's going through. The meeting was arranged on the mining station itself, in a neutral cargo bay, under terms that both sides could accept. Zarathus arrived with only Marcus and 2 guards, while Galactic brought an equal number of his fighters. The deserter was immediately recognizable as Kethmori, but his scales had taken on the mottled gray coloration that indicated severe psychological trauma. His movements were jerky and aggressive, and his eyes held the wild look of someone who had abandoned hope. The great Zarathus comes to gloat over her victories, Galactic snarled as she approached. Come to see how your butchery broke one of your own people? No, Zarathus replied quietly. I came to see if I could help you heal. The suggestion seemed to enrage him further. Heal? My mate and children are dead because of your war. My entire family turned to ash by Kethmori bombardment. There is no healing from that. Zarathus felt her heart synchronize as she recognized the pain in his voice. It was the same pain she had carried since Nexus 7, only without any framework for processing it. You're right, she said. There's no healing that erases that loss or makes it acceptable. But there is healing that lets you carry the pain without being destroyed by it. Speak plainly, Butcher. I lost my brother at Nexus 7. 47 people under my command died because of my mistakes. For months, I thought the only way to honor their sacrifice was to destroy myself with guilt. Galvec's aggressive posture faltered slightly. Nexus 7 was a military engagement. Your people were soldiers who knew the risks. And your family were civilians who should have been safe, Zarathus agreed. Your loss is worse than mine. But the pain is the same. The rage is the same. The feeling that the only way to make it mean something is to hurt others the way you've been hurt. For the first time since arriving, Galactic seemed to really see her. His wild eyes focused on her face, searching for deception or manipulation. What are you saying? I'm saying that keeping this war going won't bring back your family. It will just create more families like yours. More people who lose everything and decide that the only response is more violence. Marcus watched from nearby, monitoring Zarathus's vital signs and ready to intervene if the emotional stress became too great. But her heart rhythms remained stable, even strengthening as she spoke. The human taught me something, Zarathus continued, gesturing toward Marcus. He taught me that the best way to honor the dead is to prevent more death. To use the pain as motivation for creating something better, not just destroying more things. Galvek stood silent for a long moment, his hands clenching and unclenching. When he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. How? How do you carry it without going mad? One day at a time, Zarathus replied. With help. With people who understand. With the knowledge that your pain matters, but it doesn't have to define everything you do going forward. The conversation that followed lasted 3 hours and changed the entire nature of the conflict in the Varric system. By the end of it, both Kethmori and rebel representatives had agreed to a temporary ceasefire and the establishment of humanitarian aid protocols for displaced civilians. More importantly, Galvek had agreed to begin psychological treatment with Marcus, recognizing that his current path led only to more suffering for everyone involved. As they returned to the Sword of Retribution, Marcus noted that Zarathus's heart rhythms had remained synchronized throughout the entire stressful encounter. How do you feel? He asked. Useful, she replied with surprise. For the first time since Nexus 7, I feel like my experience might have served a purpose beyond just causing pain. That's the final stage of healthy grief processing, Marcus observed. When suffering transforms into wisdom that can help others. 6 months after the Varric's negotiations, Zarathus stood before the Kethmori High Command presenting what would become known as the Chen Protocol, a revolutionary approach to military psychology based on her experiences with human healing methods. The presentation room was filled with the most senior military leaders in Kethmori space, their scales gleaming with the bioluminescent patterns that marked their ranks. Heart echo syndrome has claimed 43% of our field commanders over the past decade, she began, her voice steady and confident. We have treated it as an inevitable cost of leadership, but recent developments suggest it is both preventable and treatable. Admiral Krovak, the supreme military commander, leaned forward with obvious skepticism. Commander Zarathus, while your recent tactical successes are noteworthy, the High Command remains unconvinced that alien psychological methods have military applications. Zarathus had expected this resistance. The Kethmori military culture viewed emotional vulnerability as weakness and psychological treatment as a form of surrender. But she had prepared for this moment carefully. With respect, Admiral, the current approach has failed catastrophically. We are the most militarily advanced species in known space. Yet we cannot maintain peace in our own territories, because our commanders are systematically eliminated by preventable trauma responses. She activated a holographic display showing casualty statistics from the past 50 years. Look at these numbers. Our greatest tactical minds consistently die or become incapacitated within 5 years of experiencing major losses. Meanwhile, species we consider militarily inferior, like the humans, have developed methods that allow their leaders to function effectively for decades despite experiencing comparable trauma. The data was undeniable, but Admiral Sector, a veteran of countless campaigns, remained hostile. You propose that we adopt the emotional weakness of mammals? That we corrupt our warrior culture with alien softness? I propose that we adopt the strategic advantages of emotional resilience, Zarathus replied calmly. Her heart rhythms remained perfectly synchronized despite the stress of confronting the most powerful military leaders in Kethmori space. Admiral, how many successful negotiations have you conducted with enemy forces in your career? Sector's scales darkened slightly. Kethmori do not negotiate with enemies. We defeat them. And yet the wars continue. Generation after generation, the same conflicts with the same outcomes. We win battles but never achieve lasting victory, because we've never learned to address the underlying causes of conflict. She brought up tactical reports from Varrics, showing how the negotiated settlement had ended a 3-year insurgency in 6 months and actually increased Kethmori influence in the region through cooperation rather than conquest. The rebels who would have fought us for decades are now providing intelligence about genuine terrorist threats because they trust that we will protect civilian populations rather than simply eliminating all opposition. Dr. Marcus Chen, who had been quietly observing from the back of the room, stepped forward when invited to speak. His presence among so many massive predatory aliens was striking, but he showed no signs of intimidation. Honored commanders, he began, using the formal address Zarathus had taught him. Human military psychology is not about weakness. It's about optimization. A commander whose judgment is impaired by unprocessed trauma is a liability to their forces, regardless of their tactical knowledge or courage. He activated a medical display showing Zarathus's heart rhythm patterns over the past 6 months. Commander Zarathus's cardiovascular efficiency has improved by 37% since beginning treatment. Her tactical decision-making speed has increased by 22%. Her ability to process complex battlefield information has improved across all measured parameters. Admiral Krovak studied the data with growing interest. Military leaders could argue with philosophy, but they couldn't argue with performance metrics. More importantly, Marcus continued, her success rate in minimizing both military and civilian casualties has improved dramatically. The Varix operation resulted in 0 Kethmori military deaths and established long-term strategic advantages that pure military action could never have achieved. The room was quiet as the assembled commanders processed this information. Finally, Admiral Velnash, the oldest member of the High Command, spoke. "What exactly are you proposing, Commander Zarathus?" "I propose the establishment of a military psychology division within Kethmori Medical Command," she replied. "I propose mandatory psychological support for all field commanders who experience significant casualties under their command. And I propose that we begin training our officers in conflict resolution techniques that go beyond pure military solutions." The debate that followed lasted 6 hours. Traditional military leaders argued that psychological treatment would undermine the warrior culture that had made the Kethmori dominant across multiple star systems. Progressive voices pointed out that their current approach was unsustainable and was actually weakening their long-term strategic position. The turning point came when Admiral Grothek, whose own brother had died from heart echo syndrome 5 years earlier, asked for specific details about the treatment process. "Commander, describe exactly what this human healing involves. We need to understand what we would be asking our officers to undergo." Zarathus spent the next hour explaining art therapy, meditation techniques, grief processing, and forgiveness work. With each concept, she provided specific examples of how it had improved her military effectiveness rather than diminished it. "The goal is not to eliminate emotional responses," she emphasized. "The goal is to process them in ways that enhance rather than impair tactical judgment. A commander who understands their own psychological responses can compensate for potential bias and make clearer strategic decisions." The final vote was closer than expected, but decisive. The Kethmori High Command approved the establishment of a pilot program implementing psychological support protocols across 3 military districts. Dr. Chen would lead the development of species-specific treatment methods, working with Kethmori medical personnel to adapt human techniques for their physiology and culture. As the meeting concluded and the commanders filed out, Admiral Krovak approached Zarathus privately. "Commander, this is a significant departure from our traditions. Are you certain these methods will prove effective on a larger scale?" Zarathus smiled, feeling both her hearts beat in perfect synchronization. "Admiral, I was dying 6 months ago. My tactical judgment was impaired by trauma. My leadership was compromised by grief, and my career was effectively over. Today, I successfully negotiated the surrender of a 3-year insurgency and convinced the most traditional military command structure in known space to embrace revolutionary psychological techniques." She paused, then added, "If human healing methods can accomplish that, I believe they can accomplish anything." 1 year later, the preliminary results of the Chen Protocol were undeniable. Heart echo syndrome cases had decreased by 60% among participating commanders. Tactical effectiveness ratings had improved across all measured parameters. Most remarkably, several long-standing conflicts had been resolved through negotiation rather than prolonged warfare. Zarathus, now promoted to admiral and placed in charge of the Military Psychology Division, stood once again before the High Command to present the final report. "The human approach to healing trauma has not weakened our military capability," she announced. "It has revolutionized it. We are no longer just warriors who fight until we break. We are leaders who can learn from our experiences and become stronger through adversity." In the audience, Marcus Chen watched with quiet satisfaction as his patient and friend demonstrated the final stage of psychological healing, the ability to use one's own recovery to help others heal. The human who had come to fix one alien's broken Hart had inadvertently begun healing an entire warrior culture as the session ended and plans were made to expand the program across all Kethmori military divisions. Zarathis felt something she had never experienced before. Perfect harmony between her dual hearts. Her warrior nature and her capacity for growth. The healing was complete, but the real work of building a better future had only just begun.